January 2026, does not open with a loud moment, but with a strange, quiet feeling. As if the fog inside your mind has thinned after a long night. Not completely gone, but just enough to let the light come through. Enough for you to begin noticing that the things which once left you confused, exhausted, even questioning yourself, were never random at all. There are mornings when you wake up and suddenly understand why a conversation from the past stayed with you. Why a look or a sentence that seemed harmless at the time lingered far longer than it should have. Those pieces once felt scattered, disconnected, but now, quietly, they find their way back to each other, forming a picture that is clearer, more honest, not to hurt you, but to stop you from deceiving yourself. Libra begins to see the real intentions behind familiar behaviors, not through bitterness or suspicion, but through a calm, grounded clarity. You no longer ask yourself over and over if you are being too sensitive. You no longer need confirmation, because your body already knows. Your intuition already knows. And finally, your mind is willing to listen. This clarity did not arrive from a single event. It is the result of countless small moments you once brushed aside. The times you chose silence to keep the peace. The times you convinced yourself everything would eventually work out. The moments you felt something was off, yet kept going because you believed in kindness, in balance, and in the hope that patience would lead to fairness. But time has a way of being deeply fair. It shows you who truly values your softness and who simply benefits from it, who listens with presence and who waits for you to turn away, so they can continue as they please. Looking back, you realize you were never weak. You simply placed too much hope in places that were never able to return it. What matters most is this. Libra does not enter this phase with resentment. You do not need hatred to become clear. The awareness you now carry comes with a deep, quiet peace, an understanding that everyone acts from their own level of awareness. And now, you no longer blame yourself for not seeing sooner, because you know that without those unclear days, this maturity could not have formed. There is a quiet beauty in realizing how much you have grown. You no longer feel the need to argue to prove you are right. You no longer try to convince others to understand you. You simply see, you acknowledge, and you give yourself the right to choose how you move forward. It is a kind of freedom you have never known before. As this clarity settles within you, you begin to sense a subtle shift in the air around you. Things that were once hidden no longer need to be exposed with words. They reveal themselves through behavior, through pauses in conversation, through the feeling you carry after each encounter. Libra no longer searches for the truth. The truth is finding you, gently, but unmistakably. Somewhere, deep within, you understand that seeing clearly is only the beginning. This clarity did not arrive to stop you, but to prepare you for something more grounded, more real, and requiring greater courage. And as you continue forward, with eyes now accustomed to the light, other layers of truth begin to move as well, slowly, quietly, and once they begin, they cannot be undone. Not loud, not dramatic. They appear in their own quiet way, like a still surface of water, suddenly revealing small ripples you never noticed before. You no longer have to strain to see clearly. Everything enters your awareness on its own, at the right moment, in the right rhythm. There are moments that seem ordinary, yet carry a weight that is hard to name. A brief conversation, a delayed meeting with no explanation, a glance that turns away, exactly when honesty is needed most. In the past, Libra might have explained it all away, telling yourself that everyone gets tired, everyone gets busy, everyone is sometimes careless. But now, you no longer do that. Not because you have become cold, but because you have learned to respect your own inner experience? What is strange is this. When you stop searching for proof, the signs become clearer than ever. Small actions repeated again and again. Words that always leave an exit open. Decisions delayed. At the most critical moments. They are no longer isolated details. They stand side by side. Silent, yet saying more than enough. And you realize something important. The truth does not need drama to be revealed. It only needs to be seen directly. Libra begins to understand that your intuition was never wrong. It was simply overshadowed by your desire to keep the peace. You once believed that if you were softer, more patient, everything would balance itself out. But now you see clearly. Some people are not searching for balance. They are searching for advantage. And your refinement, if left unprotected, can easily become a resting place for quiet manipulation. What matters is this. You do not enter this awareness with fear. On the contrary, a deep calm is forming within you. You do not panic. When you realize someone is not sincere, you no longer feel the urge to confront or expose. You are simply no longer unclear. And this clarity gives you a strength that is quiet, steady, and deeply grounded. You may notice that you are listening to your body more closely now. A heaviness when you are near certain people. A sense of relief when you choose to create distance. These signals are not random. They are a language your intuition has been using for a long time. You are simply ready to hear it now. Libra no longer needs to overanalyze. You feel, and you trust what you feel. This clarity does not close you off from the world. It helps you choose more carefully. You begin to see the difference between connections that nourish you and relationships that drain your energy. You no longer take responsibility for explaining other people's behavior to yourself. Each person is responsible for how they show up in your life. And for the first time in a long while, you allow yourself to step away from what no longer fits without guilt. In that quiet space, a realization begins to grow. Seeing the truth is not the end of hope. It is the beginning of freedom. And when you stand still long enough to stop being pulled by surface appearances, other movements begin to unfold, quietly, as if life itself is preparing you for a new way forward, clearer, more grounded, and no longer leaving room for anything unclear to remain. And within that quiet space, another truth begins to surface. Not sharp, not loud, but deep enough to make it impossible for you to return to who you once were. Libra suddenly realizes that some things did not happen, not because you failed to see them, but because you chose not to speak. Not because you were weak, but because you believed that silence was sometimes the way to keep everything intact. You believed that if you did not make it a big deal, if you gave a little more, stepped back one more time, that fragile order would somehow stabilize itself. But time does not stand still. What is left unsaid does not disappear. It accumulates quietly, like water seeping into a foundation. And at some point, you begin to feel a heaviness that no longer comes from the situation itself, but from within you. A weight that is difficult to name. You are not angry. You are not resentful, but you are no longer at peace. That is when you understand that the silence which once felt like a safe shelter has now become the space where you are trapped. Libra looks back and sees how familiar it became to soften everything around you. You knew how to speak in ways that spared others pain, how to arrange situations so everyone felt satisfied, how to place other people's emotions before your own. Yet in doing so, there were moments when you ignored your own signals, times when your chest tightened while your face still smiled, times when something felt wrong, but you told yourself it would pass. You became very good at keeping the peace, but never stopped to ask what it was costing you. The uncomfortable truth you are facing now is not here to make you blame yourself. It has arrived to help you grow in a different way. You begin to understand that not all silence is compassion, and not all yielding is kindness. Sometimes silence simply allows an old pattern to continue existing, a structure where your needs are always placed second and your boundaries fade. With time, you may realize that you waited for a long time for someone to understand on their own, for them to recognize the limit, for them to change. But this month, something shifts quietly inside you. You stop waiting, not because you have lost faith in people, but because you are placing that faith back where it belongs, in yourself, in your own perception, in the value of clarity. You understand that if you continue to stand aside, if you keep hoping things will resolve on their own, the balance will not move. Life rarely adjusts itself without a clear signal. And this time, that signal does not come from anyone else. It comes from a very quiet decision within you that you can no longer overlook, what is slowly draining you. This awakening does not push you into conflict. It does not turn you cold or rigid. On the contrary, it makes you more honest. Honest with your emotions, honest about what you can accept and what you cannot. You begin to see that speaking up does not always create rupture. Sometimes it is prolonged silence that quietly breaks things apart. In that space, you allow yourself to pause, to breathe, to look directly at what has happened without judgment. You do not need to repair the past. You only need to stop repeating it. And as you stand at the intersection between an old habit and a new way of being, there is a clear knowing. From here on, things will not operate as they once did. Not because the world has changed, but because you are ready to step out of the role of holding balance for everyone else and begin holding yourself steady. And the moment you stop avoiding that truth, something very clear begins to form. No more haze, no more hesitation. You are standing still in the familiar flow of life. Yet inside, everything has changed. There is a very specific moment when Libra realizes you are no longer waiting, not waiting for others to change, not waiting for circumstances to soften, not waiting for one more sign. You are standing at a point where, whether you like it or not, life requires a choice about how you move forward. That moment is not dramatic. In the way people imagine, there is no thunder, no major event. It arrives quietly. Ordinarily, it might be a sentence you have heard too many times before, a familiar situation replaying exactly as it always has. And suddenly, you understand something clearly. If you remain silent again, if you act as though nothing happened, everything will continue to loop. Not better, not worse, but certainly not different. Libra feels a gentle tension in the chest. Not fear, but the weight of a real choice. You understand now that action is no longer a luxury or an option. It has become necessary to protect the peace you are slowly reclaiming. And this action does not need to be loud. It does not need witnesses. It does not need approval. It only needs to be true to you. You begin to see clearly that boundaries are not walls meant to push others away. Boundaries are where you stand steady, so you are not carried off course. It may be the first time you say no without a long explanation. It may be the moment you pause before taking on responsibility that was never yours. It may be a small shift in how you respond, but inside, it is a significant step forward. And the beautiful part is this: when you allow yourself to be decisive, you do not lose your kindness. You simply stop using it to harm yourself. You realize you can be soft and clear at the same time. You can listen and still hold your ground. This is not confrontation. This is maturity. A kind of maturity that does not need to announce itself, yet is very difficult to move. There may be surprised looks. There may be reactions you did not expect. But what surprises you most is what you feel inside. A genuine sense of relief, as if you have finally set down a weight you carried for far too long. You no longer have to monitor everything to keep it balanced for everyone else. You only need to be sure you are no longer stepping away from yourself. And then you realize something essential. When you change how you stand, the balance around you must adjust. Relationships built on your constant yielding no longer function the same way. Not because you are wrong, but because the old rules no longer apply. You do not need to control the outcome. You only need to remain steady in your decision. In that quiet space, a new kind of trust begins to grow. The understanding that you do not need dramatic action to change your life. Sometimes, one choice made at the right moment, one step taken with clarity, is enough for the entire current to begin shifting direction. And as you stand there, with a calm you have never known before, you realize you are ready for what comes next. Movements no longer centered on endurance, but on protecting the value of who you truly are. And in the very moment you hold steady in that decision, a realization begins to spread, soft, yet deeply rooted. You begin to understand that action does not wear the face you once feared. It does not need raised voices. It does not require winners and losers. It does not need anyone to fall for you to remain standing. Action, for Libra now, feels like a natural gesture of self-respect. Gentle, yet impossible to ignore. Perhaps in the past, you believed that if you spoke up, things would become tense. If you stepped back, someone would be disappointed. If you said no, you would no longer be seen as agreeable or kind. But as you truly step into this space, you discover something very different. Choosing to protect yourself does not make the world collapse. It simply reveals what has been out of balance for a very long time. Libra begins to understand that saying what needs to be said is not an act of harm, but an act of clarity for both sides. Stepping away from a situation that is no longer fair is not running away. It is ending the slow erosion of yourself and no longer allowing others to decide for you is not selfish. It is a healthy choice made by someone mature enough to take responsibility for their own life. There is a subtle shift in how you show up. You no longer rush to explain. You no longer feel the need to prove that you are right or good. You simply live in alignment with what feels true. And that creates a very different energy, calmer, clearer, one that asks others either to adjust how they treat you or to quietly step away. The most beautiful part is this: when you act from your own values, you do not lose your compassion. You can still understand without carrying what is not yours. You can still listen without abandoning yourself. You can still love without trading your peace for a connection that has drifted away from fairness. This is not hardness. This is maturity, forged through many seasons of silence. There may be days when things feel a little emptier, when you no longer serve as the anchor for what never truly belonged to you. The space around you grows quiet. Yet, in that quiet, you begin to hear your own voice again. A voice long overshadowed by responsibility, expectation, and roles you once took on without question. You begin to feel lighter in your body, Sleep comes more deeply. Small decisions feel easier. Not because life has suddenly become simple, but because you are no longer moving against yourself. Each action you choose now carries inner agreement, and that is a strength that lasts, that holds, that is difficult to shake. Libra understands that self-protection is not closing the heart. It is discernment. Choosing relationships built on mutual respect. Choosing situations that do not require constant self-sacrifice, just to remain. Choosing a way of being where you do not have to shrink, to fit into someone else's space. And as you stand in that clarity, something very natural begins to happen. Life responds differently, not instantly, not through miracles, but through small, consistent shifts. Those who no longer align begin to drift away. New opportunities appear quietly, as if the moment you stop resisting yourself, the current around you stops resisting you as well. In that slower rhythm of breath, you sense that you are no longer moving by old momentum. You are entering a way of living where every action has weight without heaviness. And as you continue forward from this grounded place, other changes begin to form silently. No need to name them yet, only the awareness that the world outside is beginning to respond to you by a very different set of rules. And it is within that very quiet shift that you begin to recognize something essential. There is nothing more you need to do, nothing you need to say. Simply standing in the right place within yourself is already enough to create movement. Libra feels it clearly. When you are no longer easily shaken, no longer reacting from old habits, no longer doubting your own perception, the atmosphere around you begins to change as well. It is as if a hidden order that has existed for a long time has started to loosen. You are not trying to disrupt anything. You are simply no longer participating in the old games, and that alone forces life to adjust. Those who were once comfortable with you always stepping back, always considering them first, suddenly feel less supported. Not because you have grown colder, but because you have grown clearer. And that clarity leaves no room for manipulation to survive. Libra begins to understand that true power does not come from controlling others, but from no longer being controlled. When you stop reacting immediately, stop rushing to smooth things over, stop explaining away behavior that lacks transparency, everything naturally slows down. And in that slowing, true motives begin to surface. No investigation needed, no analysis required. They reveal themselves through how people behave. When you are no longer accommodating, you may notice that some relationships feel more tense. Some people appear confused, even uncomfortable. Not because you have done something wrong, but because they are no longer familiar with this version of you, the version that no longer carries the responsibility of keeping everything balanced, the version that no longer accepts unspoken agreements that lack fairness. And deep down, you understand that every healthy change needs time to be accepted. What surprises you most is not how others react, but what you feel inside. A very different kind of steadiness. You are no longer pulled into other people's emotions. You no longer feel the need to fix everything. You stand there, observing, allowing truth to move on its own. There is a deep peace in knowing that you do not need to do anything more to prove your worth. Libra begins to see that manipulation, if it exists, only survives when it has something to hold on to. And what it once held on to was your unprotected softness. When you withdraw that anchor, when you no longer allow others to lean on your silence, or your kindness. For personal gain, all calculations lose their power. No confrontation required. No exposure needed. Simply no longer standing. In the old place, you can feel that you are entering a deeply mature state of being. A place where you do not need to win and no longer fear losing. You only need to live in alignment with your truth. And that truth becomes the new foundation for every relationship, every decision, every step forward. What no longer fits naturally falls away. What can exist on a foundation of respect remains. There is a quiet beauty in realizing you no longer have to stay on guard. You do not need to overprotect yourself. When you stand in the right place, everything around you rearranges itself in a fairer way, not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, but because you have stopped accepting rules that drain you. And within that flow, new opportunities begin to appear naturally, not loudly, not dramatically. Doors open. In places you once overlooked, people enter your life with a different energy. Choices feel lighter, less strained. As if the moment you shift your inner position, the outer world is required to respond with a new structure. As you continue forward in this grounded steadiness, there is a clear sense that everything is moving toward a point of readiness, a point where you are no longer simply reacting to life, but consciously choosing how you show up within it. And from that place, a deeply human message begins to emerge. Lasting change does not come from dramatic action, but from standing correctly. And once you are standing in the right place, nothing can manipulate you the way it once did. And then, within all of those quiet movements, one truth becomes impossible to deny. You have seen there is no fog thick enough to hide anything anymore. Libra understands that this moment did not arrive to test you further, but to ask a simple, honest question. Now that you see clearly, what will you choose for yourself? There are seasons in life when hesitation is allowed, when waiting is permitted, when believing that things will eventually adjust on their own feels reasonable. But this month does not carry the energy of delay. It carries a very clear invitation, direct, yet never forceful. An invitation to step out of the place you once stood, long enough to realize you can no longer live on unconditional yielding. You do not need to think any further to prove anything. You have thought enough. You have observed enough. You have endured enough. What is missing now is not information, but permission. Permission to act from what you already know is right. Not to oppose anyone, but to stop betraying yourself. Action here does not mean a dramatic leap. Sometimes it is simply not turning back one more time, not continuing to explain what no longer makes sense, holding a decision steady, even when someone is unhappy. These actions may appear small, but they carry a particular weight. They tell life that you are ready to step into a different order. Libra can feel it clearly. When you no longer retreat, time itself begins to shift. Situations that once repeated start to dissolve. Relationships that existed only through your endurance can no longer hold their old shape. And in their place, a new space opens, wider, lighter, a space where you no longer have to tense just to keep everything balanced. There is something deeply meaningful about realizing the scales are tilting in your favor, not because you defeated anyone, but because you stopped placing yourself at a disadvantage. You stand there with a calm that runs very deep, and for the first time in a long while, You do not need to ask whether you are doing the right thing. You know, and that knowing brings a rare kind of peace. The final message of January 2026 is not a warning, but a deeply human reminder. Seeing the truth is a gift, but acting from that truth is how you honor the gift. You do not need to become someone else. You only need to return to the place that is truly yours. And as you move forward from there, with eyes accustomed to the light and a heart that no longer hesitates, life will no longer operate by its old rules. It will respond to you with opportunities that match the values you chose to protect. Slowly, yet surely. Gently, yet irreversibly. And in that beautifully quiet space, you have crossed an important threshold. Not to become harder, but to live more truthfully with yourself.